the point that we're giving these very lengthy biographies. It's part of the fact that our panelists are so distinguished that they have long biographies. I can't do anything about it. Anyway, our fourth and final distinguished speaker today is another ambassador, Dr. Haim Koren, Israel's former ambassador to Egypt, a position that he held from 2014 to 2016. He previously served as the first Israeli ambassador to South Sudan and the director of the Middle East division in the Center of Political Research in Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. During his tenure with the ministry, his positions included serving as a director of political planning and deputy spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He's also served in various diplomatic capacities in Chicago, Alexandria, Egypt, Kathmandu, Nepal, and elsewhere. Ambassador Koren is an expert on the Arab world. His PhD focused on Islam and in Sudan, and he also dealt with issues such as the Arab media, Arab citizens of Israel, the Palestinians, radical Islam, political history of the Middle East, tribal societies in the Middle East, and many other things, among which is Sufism in the Middle East and beyond. In 1993 to 1995, he was the honorary member of the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at the University of Chicago. 2008 to 2011, he was an instructor at the National Defense College of Israel. Ambassador Koren has been a member of the advisory board of the Slovenian Institute of Middle Eastern and Balkan Studies since 2011, and he's also a board member of the Esri Center for the Research of Iran and the Persian Gulf at Haifa University. He presently teaches at Herzliya Interdisciplinary Center, IDC, since 2017. Ambassador Koren will present Egypt's concern in the emerging geopolitical situation in the region.
The former Turkish ambassador is right. It's too long. So, anyway, when there was a long debate among Egyptian perspectives on identity, one of the leading perspectives was Tahsen, intellectual and author, that wrote about the Mediterranean. In the thinking of the Egyptians, one of some, we have some experts who deal with it, sitting right here with us, but that was mainly posted to the cultural level. There were other perspectives in the Egyptian identities, like being belong to the Nile, some being connected to Egypt, to the Egyptians, and also the regional role of Egypt towards the Middle East. Now, that was dramatically changed in the last few years, specifically from the beginning of the Arab shaking. Now, I happened to arrive to Egypt very short time after the time of Morsi and before Abdel Fattah al-Sisi started his presidency, and I could witness closely how this regime is basically shaping or refreshing his national security thinking. And even if Mubarak, that was basically survival, namely try to put Egypt above the water somehow, and Sisi faced a new reality that he has to tackle immediately. First and foremost, always in Egypt, the domestic issue is very important, namely how to feed 100 million people in a very, very limited resources that you can get out of Egypt agriculture and Egypt, I would say, abilities. Now, that means that you not have to rely only on your Mediterranean relation, but globalization were always part of modern Egypt identity, and therefore the interest of not only the Middle Eastern countries, but superpowers like US, Russia, Turkey, China, India were always located on the connection between the Red Sea and the Suez Canal due to the fact that all the goods were going from Bab el-Mandab to the Suez Canal to Europe and to the Mediterranean, and therefore the outcome is that the stability of Egypt is important not only to Egypt but to the entire region. That is very important cornerstone in the thinking of Egyptian national security. Now, when Abdel Fattah al-Sisi came to power, he realized the reality had changed dramatically in Egypt and in the region. Now, if during the 70s, Islam started to be radicalized in Egypt and elsewhere and globalized out of Muslim Brotherhood to then later on to Saudi Arabia, to Afghanistan in the 80s, and so on, and this dimension played a role basically parallelly to the Iranian Revolution in 79, and when Islam tried to get a kind of a role of rival to the Arab regime in the area, or later on fighting the Arab regime in the area, the idea came from the core of the Muslim Brotherhood during the 70s and developed later on to the very, very radical Islam that becoming a problem to these regimes in the Middle East. So Sisi came into power while instead of dealing with the old fragmentation or old thinking of Arab-Israeli conflict, he understood that rather we're talking now about a different equation where the Sunni Arab countries, mostly Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and some of the Emirates, getting some common interest together with Israel, when we have two main targets that we have to fight. First, Islamic radicalism, you name it, but Sisi named it. Muslim Brotherhood, ISIS, Hamas, and so on. And at a certain point, Muslim Brotherhood got out of the law and became an enemy, a formal enemy. And unlike Mubarak that fought the Muslim Brotherhood, Sisi decided to go all the way and to fight terrorism and to call it terrorism. Now, when you see that picture and you start to see the world as partners, rivalries, enemies, you change a little bit your state of mind. Because if all of a sudden there is a new axis, strange I might say, for us as Israelis for the first time in the last 70 years, we can talk about cooperation between Jordan, Israel, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the Emirates, trying to fight terrorism on one hand, and picturing Iran as an enemy on the other hand. We have a very important two bases that we can have common interest, that we can come work together against them. That changed radically the whole thinking of the Middle East. So if that is the case, and according to Major General Golan hinted on that, there's a pretty good cooperation between Egyptian and Israeli army, specifically in Sinai, that means that Sisi strategically decided to shift the idea that he can play on the pan-Arab ticket against Israel, and he practically prefer to work together with Israel, not noisily. I agree with you that we better work under the table, but still working very hard together. That will be great for Egypt, for Saudi Arabia, for Emirates, and for Israel. That's very important role. Now, I spoke about partners. What about rivalries? Egypt pictures Erdogan as a rivalry, if not more than that. Not only because his behavior, but the fact that he pictures himself as a new sultan from the Ottoman time, but coming with a new axis who against Egypt very clearly, namely supporting the radical Islam together with Qatar, namely those axes that not supporting in the Arab Sunni countries on the Middle East that I mentioned before, but prefer to go with Hamas, with Qatar, and sometimes, in a certain circumstances, against Israel, in order to promote a kind of approach of Islam which is more radical than the Egyptian. So the Egyptian regime and the Egyptian, basically, people deny. I read today the article of the Washington Post that they bringing David Pollock from Washington Institute, who states that according to the polls, third of the Egyptian people support the Muslim Brotherhood. I don't know where he took the data for, but I'm not sure that that is the situation. Egyptians used to tell me in all levels that in one point they agree that most of the people, after the year of mercy, they reject the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt because the damage that they brought to them, it's really they succeeded in 1 year to ruin their whole reputation that they used to have up till then when they considered part of the Egyptian society. Sometimes they were rejected, but basically they were part of the Egyptian society. In the era of Obama administration, Obama, from its own reason, thought that if he hugged the Muslim Brotherhood and enabled them to be part of the new thinking of America, to come to work together with all kind of publics in the Arab world, it came to a situation, to a clash with Sisi's regime, when Obama wanted to force Sisi to accept the Muslim Brotherhood as part of the parliament, as part of the people, and the Egyptians got crazy and angry on the Americans on that thought. So no wonder he said, how can you talk about forcing me and threatening me with sanctions to put my own people that I consider, that I define as terrorists, to be part of the parliament? That's very important, as you said before, who defines terrorism and how. Now, when Trump was elected, in Egypt there was a big joy, as much as in Saudi Arabia, as much in the Emirates, and that perceived as a very important development in this new era of the Middle East. Now, the main issue of Egypt is domestic, the economy. The two main bases that Sisi would like to consist his policy is on, first, fighting terrorism or keeping the security, domestically and outside, regionally, and second, to base a good economy, mostly tourism, and so on. Now, that's a kind of a circle that feeds itself. If you have a better economy, more tourists will come, more money will come inside, more security will be to the people, and Egypt will be, again, coming back to its position that it used to have in the past. Now, when we're talking about our issues with Hamas and Sinai, for example, together with Egypt, I witnessed at the first time in 2014, when we have the war in Gaza, as Sisi was bothered what it will cause to its own role in the area, but very soon he understood that he brings him to a position that a very important mediator in the area. And I remember that John Kerry, with his shuttle diplomacy, came back and forth to Cairo and tried to put Turkey and Qatar into the mediation. Egyptian was so angry on John Kerry, he said, what the hell are you doing? You don't understand what's going on here. That leaves the mediation to us. We know what to do. Later on, Sisi understood that it contributes to his prestige in the area to be the only possible mediator between Israel and Gaza, Israel and the Palestinians, and he preserved it very importantly up till now. Now, Sisi is also looking at the situation that in its own border, we have a 2,000 kilometers border with Libya, bordered on the map, but open border that ISIS and other militias are endangering all the time Egyptian people in Libya and sometimes within Egypt. ISIS murdered in my time 21 Copts, Egyptian Copts in Egypt. And they coming from Sinai, and the Egyptian army has to fight them. They consider it a very, very good threat. I would say in their priorities, Libya is even upper than Sinai in terms of fighting terrorism. Sudan in the south, never been stable enough for Egypt. He cannot trust Bashir, but he have developed in the last 2 years some kind of a thinking that if we would go on win-win instead of a zero-sum game, he can win both in Sudan and in Ethiopia with a Renaissance dance, with a nada, and try to go towards Ethiopia and Sudan in order to strengthen his position in the south and in Africa. You know, last week, Sisi went to Africa and tried to strengthen his position there. It's very important to him to keep Africa down there and I would say to take the cradle of the Nile to be kept by both sides, both from the Saudi and Yemen side and both from the African side, and to try to handle the Nile crisis going on, and that is a very essential, basic interest of Egypt to go on because the water issue, it's a big water in Egypt. Now, when you think about what you mentioned, and I agree in a way, about perceiving the national respect of a country, specifically civilizations that we witness in our area, not only your civilization, going back to Haran and so on, but also the first Persian and the Egyptian and so on. I agree that some of the problem in those conflicts is the feelings that we, not Israelis, we, Turks, we, Persian, we, Egyptian, are not respected enough. I agree that sometimes other nations, like the US, are perceived as not respecting enough the pride, the national pride of very ancient civilization. That's also part of the game. But when we're talking about a Middle East at its shape now, and we are still within the process, we need to understand that national pride is only one part of the issue. It's not enough to rely on that. You need to find all the time enough partners to build coalitions. Now, when you define very clearly what your destinations are, and I said clearly that Sisi defined them, you know where you're going. Now, stability by recruiting countries and superpowers to support stability in Egypt, Sisi will prevail. He understands that he needs to rely on those support, not only economically, but also morally, to get his policy going ahead. So if he will succeed in the new project economically that he have together now, the last one with the energy with Israel, Cyprus, and Greek towards Europe to be a hub of gas with a new field on the water that they discovered very close to Egypt. And in Egypt, there's a growing and a very big necessity for energy. We could feel it every day. That means that the Mediterranean will be really a hub, not only for gas and energy, but for strategic cooperation. Now, the fact that we are witnessing now access of Arab Islamic Sunni regimes coming together with Israel, putting Turkey, Iran, Qatar in a very different position, means that the processes in that area is changing. Now, when it's not a matter of only regime in Turkey, it's a matter of the ideology, and you on the opposition of Erdogan, to come back to the Ottoman time. Now, in a very few time, he will demand you to speak Ottoman law, and coming back to that making no sense. So, and Turkey, no question, is a very important actor in this equation of the Middle East, and Iran too, as well, I agree. The question is how we handle it and how everybody start to understand what's going on. Now, Egypt, at the beginning, when they tried to look how to shape the new policy here, they supported, for example, with Saudi Arabia, the full rejection of Bashar al-Assad. They said that it is a disaster and he should be removed. After a while, the Russian persuaded them that it's better to have Syria for the time being with Bashar al-Assad till it will get its own stability. And Saudi Arabia was angry at Egypt because it didn't go its own way. But at the time, Russia agreed to join Egypt and to go into Libya more deeply. And now Russia goes along the Red Sea down to Africa, including to Djibouti, Somalia, and all this area to have a hub in that area, as well as Saudi Arabia, as well as Qatar. So we have a very different regional situation right now. It's not sure that it will go on for the next few years. It might change because due to situation of Russian policy, American policy, everything reflects everything. The situation in Syria can change some accesses in the Middle East. Situation in Yemen, the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Iran, reflecting all of us, including Egypt. So every actor in this equation looking outside on the other actor to see how can he participate and cooperate and how can he reject. So we all hope that Sisi will succeed to consist a very solid policy that will be part of that policy, regional policy, for the sake of Egypt and for the sake of the Middle East. Thank you very much.